Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Deep Dive. My name is John, and I'm sitting across the table from Pastor Shawn Scarborough. He's the lead pastor of Family Worship Center in Lakeland, Florida. I don't know why I still have to read that off the page. Our goal for this conversation is to hopefully start more conversations in your small groups, your relationships, your day-to-day life about how to become a better disciple of Jesus. So today we'll be taking some key topics from Pastor Shawn's Sunday messages and expounding on them a little bit more in this conversation. We won't get to everything, so if you weren't here on Sunday or maybe I didn't have the opportunity to join us, check that out on our YouTube channel as well. So, Pastor Shawn, how you doing?
Excellent. How are you?
Awesome. I'm doing well.
Good.
I'm doing well. Isaiah chapter 40, this is kind of where you hung out yesterday. And this idea that even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So this idea of walking in the strength of God, there's seasons of, it seems like there's seasons of running, there's seasons of walking. And you said that every single one of us are in some place, in some facet of our life where we need his strength. When we wait for him, he renews our strength. And so this idea of the strength of God, I just thought it'd be cool to talk about, because what does it look like to experience the strength of God? We have this promise in the Word, but is it a feeling? Is it like when the Incredible Hulk transforms, if you're into Marvel, or is it like, this just superpower energy? Because I wonder sometimes if maybe we're waiting for something that we already have access to, or maybe we're waiting for something that we're already experiencing or walking in. And so what does it look like to experience the strength of God?
Yeah, this is probably more practical than theological, but it seems like when it says he'll renew your strength, it takes you to a place where you're not tired. So it's almost like it's reviving what you had. So you started the journey well. You started, your first half mile felt great. Your fifth mile, you can run. You're just tired. So if you're renewed, then the fifth mile would feel like the first mile.
Right.
So I don't think it's like going Banner to Hulk, like this strength that you weren't walking in.
Right.
It seems more, again, at a practical level, it seems more like the strength I have, the faith that I have, that what I've already built up is renewed. Where, when we're going through life, we're depleting. I mean, every day. It's why we eat. It's why we rest. We wake up the next day not stronger. In that sense, we wake up renewed. So it seems like the supernatural nature of it is that it happens in an instant, but the level is that it takes us where we, in a sense, where we were.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's almost very maybe more simple than it is complicated in that, we don't have to feel like, well, I've been waiting on the Lord, and so I'm waiting for this some kind of big event to happen.
Yeah.
But rather he renews our strength on a daily basis, and not to overcomplicate things or to get too complicated. But I hear you say, when we're feeling tired, I feel like I know I have the tendency where I could take that and run with it and say, well, I'm tired, so therefore I don't have the strength. What is the difference between being tired and things just being difficult?
Yeah.
Because I wonder if sometimes we might make excuses. This season isn't for me, or I'm in a season of, where I just need to wait more because I'm so tired. Tiredness is different than maybe there being conflict or there being, a difficulty. And you can still have strength and there be friction, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. You summed it up well. I don't think we should confuse being tired with the idea that I need to stop. Because we can, do you quit marriage because it's hard? Do you say, okay, I'm not going to parent today. These kids are too difficult. I'm going to go lock myself away for 4 days and then come back. Yeah, no, I don't. I think we can use that as an excuse. I think for me, it seems like as we put off certain adult functions, we can almost get used to not doing hard things. And then when we enter in something that does require us do something hard, like marriage or like parenting, there isn't a hack for it. There's not an app for it. There's not that thing that, oh, let me just push this button and somebody's going to bring me food, right? Like, that goes away. So from that perspective, I do think we can want life to just be easy. Yeah. And this is not saying it's the removal of ease. It's just saying that you can have the strength to keep doing the thing you're supposed to be doing.
So you also said we don't experience the awesome when we aren't willing to wait. You talked about this illustration of oranges and radishes, gerbils and cows. Yeah. Now, to be fair to all the people that listen to the Sunday message, if you're wondering what we're talking about, you're not going to know. You got to listen to it. So, but oranges and radishes, gerbils and cows. Yeah. And then you kind of took this principle out of Galatians 6:9, which is don't grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time or at the right time you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up. And so I just wonder, as whatever you're willing to share, what are some things in your life that have been worth waiting on? Yeah. And maybe some things that are a little bit more difficult to wait on.
Yeah. So let's just take. So when we got married, my wife and I got married, I was not ready to have kids. I knew in myself, this is what parenting takes. I'm too selfish for that right now. I'm just not there. So we waited. She was ready. My wife was very mature when we married. I was not very mature when we married. For me, I liked to just at 11 o'clock at night say, hey, let's go get something to drink. Let's go drive around. Let's go do something, whatever. And, like I'm still a teenager or living in a dorm or whatever. Simple things like that. My weekends. I liked my weekends. And, so I was not ready for kids. We waited 8 years, 8 years. And I was very ready when we had kids, but that was 8 years of me growing or maturing. So I guess it's more she waited, but in a sense I was waiting as well. So that was an 8-year process. Just take the capacity to lead this church. Really, that was baked in a church plant. Where it's just when you plant a church, you start from zero. So I had been here and worked my career from 96 to 2012, so 16 years of executive leadership, and then start over, start with nothing. We're just going to go start a church at zero. That 7-year process prepared me for this. It's fascinating how the 16 years of executive leadership didn't really prepare me to pastor. It was pastoring at a very grassroots level that prepared me for this. So that was 7 years of preparation to be doing what I'm doing now. Even some of the things looking into the future that the church is going to do. I've been in this position now for 3 years. There were some of those things we wanted to start day one, but it wasn't time. So we're just waiting on the timing of God. So I think all of that would be examples for me of waiting.
Yeah. Absolutely. You talked about how God determines the length of the season, that sometimes we're trying to pray summer away, but summer's here. Yep. Nothing we can do about it. I wonder, that probably brings up some conflict maybe a little bit in some of the things that we're praying towards, discerning between being in a season and then being in a place that we need to pray ourselves out of. Does that make sense? Is that something that, is that just something that's just pure discernment? Is there any practical things that we can lean on to kind of decide, hey, I need to stop trying to pray myself out of this season. This is where God has me. As opposed to, I need to be believing for the active, action of the Lord and right here, right now.
So here's how I would answer that. If the enemy is coming against you, that is not a season. It might feel like a season because maybe he's been throwing darts for, a while. That is, we resist him and he flees. We rebuke him, all the above. The enemy is not a season. The enemy is to be resisted. The enemy is to be rebuked. In my prayer life, not today, Satan, right? That's a thing. A season is when I am living in obedience. I'm where I'm supposed to be. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. There just isn't the reward yet that I know is in the Word for that action. That's a season.
Yeah.
So when they were called out of darkness into light, so out of slavery, they left Egypt, and now they were going to the Promised Land. Well, that wilderness between Egypt and the Promised Land it took a season of time to get from A to B, right? They were in the right place. They were doing some of the right things. I mean, we don't ever get it perfect, right? But they weren't going to speed up the time from Egypt to the Promised Land. And God had already said, I'm taking you the long way because there are battles on the north side that you're not ready for. So we're going to go around the south end to get you where you need to be. Here's what I didn't talk about on Sunday. I do believe we can't speed it up, but I do think we can make it longer. So if I'm not living out how I should be living out in the season, I'll miss the reward. We see that with the children of Israel. They made it to the River Jordan, and they said no. Well, then the 40 years of wandering was really just 37. The first 3-ish actually was planned. That's where he said, I need you to know that man doesn't live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. That happened when they were eating manna. That happened when they received the law from the mountain. Like, that was all within that 3-year journey. He needed to do that before they could step into the Promised Land. Yeah. So the first season was ordained. They couldn't speed it up. That was God's timing. The last 37 years, that's all on them. Yeah.
So let's talk about that, the idea of waiting for the reward, waiting for the promise, and doing our part. You brought up Hebrews chapter 6, where the writer says, and we desire each one of you to show the same earnestness, to have the full assurance of hope until the end, so that you may not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises.
Yep.
So you just gave the example of the children of Israel inheriting the promised land,
Yep.
but promises there is plural.
Sure.
And so I maybe want to talk about what some of those promises encompass in our lives. You know, is that just salvation? Is that what God has promised us personally? Is that what the promises in God's word? You know, what is he talking about there? That through faith and patience inherit the promises.
Yeah. I think it's plural. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's plural there. It always includes salvation. At the end of the day, it always includes salvation. So that is a promise. We see that when Jesus said, nobody has given up any of these things that will not receive in this life and in the life to come, eternal life. So there is that full return in this life, and then there's salvation for eternal life. So we get that part. Promises in this life, at the end of the day, are what God has personally made a promise to you. I know there are people who, they're single. They believe that God has promised them a spouse. They see it in the Word. It's a desire of their heart. When the disciples talked to Jesus about being single, he said not everybody can receive this promise or receive this command. So the ones who can't receive it, they're promised. If you find a spouse, you find a good thing, right? That's a promise in the Word. That may take longer. It's fine. It'll happen. Through faith and patience, you'll find that. Now, what is faith and patience if I'm waiting for a spouse? It's looking in the right place for the right person and not settling for someone outside of who God has called me. If I'm a male, looking for somebody that is a godly woman. If I'm a woman, what is a godly man? I'm not settling for anything less than what God has told me to look for. That might take time.
So waiting on God doesn't look like going to the club every Friday night,
right.
Buying a bunch of drinks for women. I'm just waiting on the Lord to bring the right one.
Yeah, that would be sluggish.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, and that's what's hard, because as Christians, the world would say, well, you've got to put yourself out there. You have to do these things. What does putting yourself out there in the world look like? What does putting yourself out there from the gospel look like? Yeah.
That's a great point. So what is, we just talked about an example, but what maybe for all of us, that earnestness, he says we have the desire that you have the same earnestness to have the full assurance of hope until the end. So what does earnestness look like day to day for us? We talk about these things all the time, but I think it's just great to remind ourselves, when we wake up in the morning, what does it look like to earnestly pursue the promise?
Yeah. So when earnestness in that context was defined 4 words later, or however many, by faith and patience. So what was, now we would go into Hebrews and go further and say, okay, what was the faith of Abraham, or the faith of Gideon, or the faith of David, or like, what did that look like? What did patience look like? Let's follow their line. Talked about Joseph. They continued to follow God. At the end of the day, if you just look at their trajectory, they just continued to follow God. Didn't mean they didn't make mistakes. You will find plenty of mistakes. That's one of the very liberating ideas about really the patriarchs in the Old Testament. They did make mistakes. We make mistakes. That didn't disqualify them from the promise, assuming that they corrected their way. We also see those who turned from following God and they were destroyed. Those men never turned from God. They made mistakes. They didn't turn from God. So for us, day to day, that looks like a pursuit of Him. I'm doing work the way He's told me to do work. Yeah. All things are done unto the Lord. What does that look like? What does respecting the person who's leading me, what does that look like? That's a gospel command. I'm pursuing, if I can't respect her or him who are leading me, then I need to be subordinate or submissive to them because God commanded it, like He commanded it. So I'm being obedient to Him by being a good employee. My work is as unto the Lord. Maybe that customer, maybe that client, maybe that person is obnoxious, but I'm working as unto the Lord. Because we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, right? Like that person, there's an opportunity through them for there to be a blessing. Like they pay a bill, an invoice, or whatever that then I'm paid from. So if I see that differently, there's a reward. My patience with them, my faith in God working with them, whatever, what's the reward? I keep my job, possible promotion, increase, whatever, that the reward happens eventually. But if I'm sluggish, if I mistreat customers, if I'm insubordinate to my boss, if I'm doing things that aren't working as unto the Lord, is there going to be a reward? Absolutely not. So very practically, that's a part of it. Yeah. And also, though, when I get to that critical spot of I have had it, okay, I'm on a break. Maybe the break that particular day isn't going to lunch and just downloading my complaints with 3 other coworkers. I just say, hey, you guys have a good one today. I got to go catch up on some stuff. We'll tune back in tomorrow. I go get in my car and I just worship God. I pray. I spend time with Him to get renewed in my strength so that I can step back in at 1 o'clock and be ready to go.
That's a great point. I feel like this kind of ties into what we're talking about, but had somebody that was more interested in what you talked about a month ago. You talked about ascending practices. Yep. And then descending moves of God, which I think is very relevant to the idea of being earnest in our faith. Yep. So these ascending practices, you mentioned the ascension of worship, yep, rising up to God, and other means of ascending like prayer. Yep. Maybe talk a little bit more about this. In our day-to-day, is there ever a bad time? Is there ever a bad time to practice these things?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we're waiting on God, then it's never a bad time to worship Him. It's never a bad time to pray. Yeah. To fast. I mean, of course, we could go into the logical or the more like situation by situation. Yeah. But in general, we'll say for the month, as we're looking at a month for a whole, we don't have to say, I'm not sure if I'm going to do that this month. Yeah. I think that's important. Anything else that you would speak to the idea of ascending and descending? Yeah.
So I think it's important for us to be able to understand ascension is something I'm giving to Him. So we have entire people groups in Christianity that, and I say this humbly, I'm a Bible study guy. I'm a Bible nerd. I spend way too much time, if I can say it that way, in prepping for sermons, in the sense that I go down rabbit holes. I'm there for hours. It's nothing that I would use in a sermon. It just captured me and drew me in, right? Saying that's God giving me something. him giving me revelation. Or faith comes, right? Faith comes by hearing. That's a descending activity. When I get in the Word, I'm receiving from him. When I worship, I'm giving him something. When I give of my offerings, I'm giving him something. When I'm praying, I'm giving him actually lordship and saying, I'm not looking to these other areas for an answer. I'm looking to you. So we see where prayers are stored up in heaven, so we know they ascend. We see where our worship is filling the halls of heaven. We know it ascends. The Apostle Paul said that your gift is a pleasing aroma to heaven, so we know it ascends. So we just have a few of these things in our Christian practices that are ascending. And if you look at it, really, you just went into church stats right now, you would see that things like giving is not increasing. Well, why? Because there are ascension offerings that we're not giving like we used to give. If you step into the majority, and this is a huge differentiator at FWC versus other places. You go into most churches, you don't have a lot of hands in the air. They might hum along, but worship is really turned more into just a live performance. It's just an entertainment factor. Churches use it to say, oh, we have a cooler setup or a better sound than the next guy or whatever. Maybe that's a little harsh, but it's not for the purpose of just evoking the drawing out of worship from people. That's an ascension, right? Yeah. So if my relationship with God, if I remove my offering and I remove my worship, and my prayer is just not fellowship with him or looking to him, but it's just, hey, I need you to do this for me. What are we actually giving him that's ascending? Nothing. We have turned into consumers. I'm just here to get from him. So I'm all on the descending side. Here, I'm going to get in the Word, so you'll give me some revelation or you'll give me some. I'm all for that. But it seems like we posture ourselves to receive revelation by our worship to him. I think that's why in our liturgy, or our service flow maybe is a better word for evangelical churches, our service flow always begins with worship, because we see that in the gospel, right? Like I enter his gates with thanksgiving. I enter into his courts with praise. Why? Because I'm giving him something. If you look at the build of the original tabernacle and temple, that altar space was before stepping into the holier places. Like I'm going to walk in with something from me to you, and posture become ready to receive from you. So I think we don't receive as much from him because we haven't ascended. We haven't given something. Like that, it was important to them. If we go back in, like it was important to them that these altars were on high places. That's why they called them high places. They went up. They ascended. They burnt. It was an offering that goes up. There was so much imagery in that. And then when in the New Testament we just say things, almost flippantly, like a living sacrifice or the fruit of our lips that gives praise. Like, what does that mean? That means he receives that praise the same way that smoke, we could physically see it ascend. It's the same call in the New Covenant as it was in the Old Covenant. It's just what's ascending is different. Yeah. And I think it's one of the big mistakes of Christianity, because we're so evangelistic and we're not making any requirement of anyone on the Lord's Day to offer up. Like we barely talk about giving because, that might offend the person that doesn't go to church. We shorten our worship lengths because, somebody that doesn't know Jesus. But what about the guy that knows Jesus? He needs to give. She needs to give. They need to have their hands up in the air. That discipleship piece, that's all ascension, man. Like the sinner doesn't give God anything. But those of us who have received of his heavenly gift, his free gift, we've got everything to offer back. Yeah. So, I could go on that probably too long. That's good. It's principally, it's those three things. Yeah. It's worship, it's giving, it's prayer. Like those are the three major ascensions that we see both Old Covenant and New Covenant. Yeah. They're different in the New, some of them, but there's still that opportunity Man, there is no. I love getting in the presence of God. Like, to think that a mere mortal can do something as silly as just sing a song, and the presence of the one who created it all comes down. That is an honor.
Yeah.
That is not an obligation. That's
yeah. That's
awesome.
really good. That's awesome. Well, lots of good things we talked about today that I think are very practical for all of us to be able to be earnest, to have the full assurance of hope until the end, so that we aren't sluggish, but we want to be imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. And so that's for all of us today. Anything else you want to add to that? We hope this conversation is a catalyst for your walk with Jesus. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, feel free to share it with someone. If not, don't share it. And to listen to Pastor Shawn's Sunday message or to get more connected to the ministry here at Family Worship Center, you can visit our website, fwclakeland.org. Subscribe to this YouTube channel or follow us on social media. And we hope you have a blessed day. And thanks for listening.